What's going on, YouTube frogs? You may or may not remember me saying in my Heizou guide that I had kind of a wacky build to show you guys, and this is the video for that, so let's just get right into it. Basically, I've been playing around with a whole bunch of builds on Heizou, and there was one in particular that stuck out to me. Typically, you're gonna build Heizou with 4-piece Viridescent Veneer or like a 2-in-2 set, so that way he can shred enemy resistances, or just deal a bunch of front-loaded damage. You can build him with attack, animo damage crit, you can build him with triple EM. Overall, he's just a super flexible unit, and you can use him in a ton of different places in tons of different roles. And for that reason, I actually think Heizou might be one of my favorite releases since Inazuma came out, even over some of the 5 stars we've gotten. And just to be clear, I don't mean that like, oh, he's definitively stronger than everyone. No, I just like him. But anyways, let's talk about the build. So essentially what we're doing today is we're playing 4-piece Thundering Fury Heizou. Now your initial reaction to this might be, honestly it might just be WTF, right? And I agree, Thundering Fury is a W. The 2-piece set gives electro damage bonus. Does Heizou use electro damage? No, not really. So the 2-piece set is completely useless, right? But it's the 4-piece set that actually makes this really, really fun. Essentially what it's gonna do is increase your overload, electrocharge, and superconduct damage by 40%, but that part doesn't even really matter that much. It's the second half of the 4-piece set effect that matters. It says triggering such effects decreases elemental skill cooldown by 1 second. It can only occur basically every 1 second. It's every 0.8 seconds, but you know. So essentially what that means is that whenever you activate an effect with Heizou by using Swirl to reapply an element to an enemy, the cooldown on your punch is going to decrease. Do note that this is basically impossible in single target, but in multi-target you can make it work pretty consistently. And I'm sure most of you guys like your punch on Heizou. It's pretty satisfying in my opinion. I really like it. And it also generates decent energy, so it lets you use your burst more. But anyways, the way this works is that you go in with something like Taser, and as long as you have an aura on the enemy, it's gonna work. The thing is, most characters have what's called standard ICD. What that means is that you can only cause a reaction once every 3 hits or once every 2.5 seconds. And this can apply to Heizou on his normal attacks. When you're just normal attacking with him, not every single hit's gonna swirl, so you're not actually getting all that swirl bonus every single time. However, if you did see my Heizou guide, which if you haven't, I suggest you check it out, it's pretty good. Whenever you do his charged attack, there's actually no ICD on it. ICD meaning internal cooldown. What that means is that if you spam his charged attack, you do normal attack, charged attack, normal attack, charged attack, every single charged attack is going to activate Swirl, which is going to give you a chance to swirl Electro or Hydro onto enemies, which is essentially just, you know, proccing the Thundering Fury effect. Specifically, your elemental damage team has to be Overload or Electrocharge or Superconductible, so you have to have either Cryo Electro, Hydro Electro, or Pyro Electro. Now keep in mind that the reason that this works so well for Electrocharged is because both Hydro and Electro can coexist on enemies at the same time, and what Swirl does is it actually just spreads elements around. So with Electro and Hydro, you're going to be triggering a lot of Electrocharged, whereas with something like Overload, because Electro and Pyro can't exist at the same time on the same enemy, that's what triggers the Overload, you will still be able to proc Thundering Fury, but it will be a lot less consistent. And not to mention that Overload also has an ICD, so you actually do have a cooldown you have to wait for to get the Thundering Fury proc anyways. So for this, I highly recommend Taser over anything else. But with any of those sort of reactions and the swirl, you'll be able to lower his cooldown by 1 second, once a second, essentially. So assuming you're doing it right, you can shave a decent chunk of time off of your skill cooldown and be able to punch really often when he's on the field. You could probably punch 2 or 3 times while he's on the field if you do it perfectly. And it's super fun because when you build him with attack, animo damage, crit with this setup, your punches hit so freaking hard and it's so consistently good. I was using Lost Prayer because that's the only crit rate weapon I have, and my Thundering Fury set isn't super balanced in the crit, and I was able to consistently put out between 50 and 60k if it didn't resist animo damage, if the enemies I was fighting didn't have that extra resistance or defense, and so it's just really satisfying to play. Now if you don't have Lost Prayer, don't worry about it. I'm gonna give you guys some other options at the end of the video if you are interested in sticking around that long, just so that you guys are aware of like what other ways you can do this, because not everyone's gonna have 5-star weapons, but I want everyone to be able to play this because it's hilarious. I love it. Now to be honest and transparent, this is not like the best build ever. If you look at like actual calcs for it, or if you look at damage comparisons, you're gonna find that it's not as strong as just building it with Viridescent if you're going to play one of these teams, because Viridescent is going to debuff enemies and it's gonna make all of your supports and all of your extra damage even stronger, and it's going to buff your swirl. So Thundering Fury, even with the extra punch every once in a while, technically doesn't deal more damage, even though it looks like it because your punch deals high damage, right? So this isn't isn't something I would call meta by any means. However, it is really fun, and it allows you to punch a lot with Heizou on field, and it really just makes you feel like you're in like a combo fighting game. Like the game feels a little bit closer to Honkai than Genshin when you're doing this right, so it's a lot of fun. I've been enjoying it. Now, there's actually a couple other things you can do. You can also decide to run Sacrificial Fragments because it has a chance to reset your elemental skill whenever you hit an enemy with it, and that way you can get 2 punches in, and then you can also have a lower cooldown on your 3rd punch, and it's really funny. I just think it's hilarious. I love it a lot. The one thing that I do caution you against is that if you want to seriously use Thundering Fury in something like Abyss, if you want to abuse this punch mechanic because you think it's fun, I actually advise against Sacrificial Fragments. Now, the reason I say that is because his punch is meant to be a big hit of damage, but it's not meant to swirl a lot of elements and, reapply those elements a bunch of times in one short instance. So in something like Taser, where you are constantly using your auto attacks or your basic attack, normal attack, whatever you want to call them, to reapply Electro in Hydro over and over and over, an EM build for Heizou is stronger because you're constantly applying those and constantly swirling. But his punch is not like that. It's not consistent swirl and electro charge damage going out over time. And so if you built Heizou Elemental Mastery for this build, I mean, it'd be funny, but you wouldn't be getting the satisfying punches that you want. And that's what I found to be the best about the Thundering Fury build, is that it's just super satisfying to get to punch over and over and over and see big green number. It's like, neuron activation, dopamine response. It just feels really fun to be able to hit constant high animo damage with a giant punch, with also a character that does these awesome like kicks and stuff too. So even though Sacrificial Fragments is actually a really solid choice in a Taser build, if you're using Thundering Fury, I wouldn't recommend it because I've found personally that Thundering Fury is a lot more fun to use with an attack, animo damage, and crit build. I'm not saying you can't build with EM, but that's just the one that I've preferred. And so for that reason, I've always built a DPS or crit weapon on him, and I found that to be really effective, as effective as Thundering Fury Heizou can be. Once again, guys, this isn't a build that I think that everyone should use all the time. It's just kind of fun and really enjoyable. I've really had a lot of fun with it. I know there's been gameplay in the background of this the entire time, but I wanted to show you guys more of a gameplay example and kind of talk you through it. So here I'm just spamming my charged attack, just going over and over, and eventually that just brings the cooldown down like a lot faster and lets me punch again. And I think the most satisfying part of this is that you're knocking back all the enemies every time, or you're like staggering enemies, and then you also do the giant kick thing that just makes me feel like Cinderace out of like a Pokemon game. I don't know, I always felt like those animations are really powerful. So just once again, guys, that build is going to be 4-piece Thundering Fury, attack % on the sands, animo damage on the goblet, and crit on the circlet, whatever you need to get that 1-to-2 ratio that I talk about again in all of my guides. Now for weapons, I did say I was going to talk more about these. Your best options are going to be Skyward Atlas, Kagura's Verity, Memory of Dust, basically all of the 5 stars. But then if you look at something like the Widsith, that's a 4-star weapon, but if you have it at higher refinements, it can beat out the 5 stars if you get the right buff. It can give you an EM buff, and give you attack buff, or it can give you just an elemental damage buff, and all of those are pretty dang solid. So I would suggest Widsith if you have access to it. If you do not have Widsith, other things that work are things like Eye of Perception, Solar Pearl. I mean, you can even use like Frostbearer, like the Dragon Spine craftable. I don't think I've ever seen anyone use that, but it works. Dodoku Tails also works because he's on field for a decent amount of time. Worst case for this, if there's a weapon that I didn't say, you can basically check if it has crit rate or crit damage in the main stat, and if it does, it's probably safe to take. If it has attack % in the main stat, that might also be pretty good. But if you want to see more, I recommend checking out my Heizou guide. I have a lot more info over there. And then for constellations, the nice thing about this is that you don't actually need to have any constellations at all. It's pretty satisfying when you do have high constellations because C6 is going to give you more crit rate and crit damage on your punch, but it's not necessary to deal the damage, if you get what I'm saying. So anyways, that's basically it for this video. If you were hoping for something that was like a little more professional or like super well written out, I didn't really feel like I needed to be that way for a video like this where I'm talking about something that's off meta or that's like literally just for fun. But either way, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you have, make sure to leave a like down below. Comment if you've tried it out, or if you like it, or if you just think it's the worst thing you've ever heard in your entire life. And subscribe to the channel. We're almost to 100K, and that would be freaking awesome if we could get there. Check out the Twitch at twitch.tv/Braxophone, and I'll catch you next time. Peace!